Well, okay then. I did not expect people to actually watch and respond to my video record of being a terrible yet devoted Hearts of Iron 4 player, but here we are. I'd like to take this time at the beginning to thank everyone who has been watching and following along. It really does mean a lot. The channel has been growing way faster and now bigger than I really had anticipated, so thank you guys again. Before we start, I should mention that this video, while being mostly about how the mod looks and plays, does briefly touch on some subjects that are uncomfortable and shows some footage from a film at the end that is also uncomfortable, so viewer discretion is advised. For the people who watched the Fire Rises video and recommended that I play Red Flood if I wanted to try some really freaky deaky Hoi 4, you'll be pleased to know that this shit melted my brain when I first opened it up. Actually, you know what? It melted my brain every time I played it. This is not an exaggeration. On first impressions, I loudly exclaimed, "What in the God's name am I looking at?" And that feeling never really let up, not even once. You guys knew exactly what I was looking for before I even did. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy diving into the mods like this. It has been helping the channel tremendously. Alright, let's get into it. Where the Fire Rises had its glaring neon digital look and the base game has its almost too clean military drabness, Red Flood is like walking through an Art Deco museum while inhaling ether. Everything is just so gold. The opening graphics, something used to set the tone for the game, are far from what you'd expect. Instead of illustrations or photos of war like the painted graphics or historical pictures, you get surrealist artwork and propaganda posters. The same holds true later in the game, with things like Goya's fight with cudgels used to announce the Spanish Civil War. This is easily one of my favorite design choices that I've seen so far across the mods. Maybe other mods do the same thing just as well. I really like the contemporary photography and overall design of the Fire Rises, but Red Flood's opulent, suffocating gold of the UI icons, its focus on the artistic and strange over the objective, does so much of the tone setting that it's really hard to overstate. I'm still not entirely sure what the overarching narrative of Red Flood is, but I think I have a decent enough idea. I believe that the story is that there was no real clear winner of the Great War, and more importantly, no clear loser. The opening explanation kind of throws a ton of exposition at you without giving you a lot of context. Russia dominated their war with Japan, and I think that rather than any nations capitulating to their enemy, instead major powers like Germany came apart at the seams and fell to socialist uprisings. This is both a simplification and the best I can do without starting to throw around a bunch of proper nouns and dates. One of the issues that I face when I play Red Flood is very similar to the one that were 2 times I opened up Kaiserreich or Redux, I can't remember which. With so many ahistorical nations staring you in the face when you open the thing up, it's really hard to contextualize anything before you know more about what's going to happen in the game. It's easier with the historical mods once you've either tried the game a few times or are already a super cool history buff and understand what roles nations are supposed to play historically to have an idea of the general way things unfold or the way you can knock things off the rails. For instance, I'm not keen enough on my World War I history yet to really get what's going on if I play Great War Redux, but I can look up and read about actual dates and countries, not so with fictitious ones. Red Flood, like other mods, can be a little more clear if you watch other people's content on it. That said, whatever video you watch is going to be all like, "Whoa, next stop Crazy Town, leave the prescriptions behind," but it isn't going to go into even a third of the stuff you're going to read and see. That's because Red Flood gets into some pretty uneasy territory, so I understand why. And guess what? We are going to talk a little bit about it. I'm not really monetized yet anyway, so fuck it. You have somewhere around 40 options for interesting countries, which was as intimidating as it was exciting to me every time I hopped back in. One hemisphere or major theater, the game is divided between the Occident and the Orient, has as many or more unique focus trees than the entire base game. Sans DLC. This does lead me to one of my main criticisms that we'll get out of the way now. For being listed as interesting countries, quite a few of the countries I tried lacked interesting focus trees. They were unique in the sense that they were not generic, but the ways they played out just really didn't do much for me. The main offender here is the ahistorical country of Fiume, the first new nation birthed out of accelerationism. The country itself starts with no real industry to speak of, and no population to build an army up. The entire focus branch that I followed was simply preparing for a war against the neighboring kingdom of Italy by handing you stuff you needed as you progress rather than allowing you to start building it up yourself. And they were all so laser focused that there wasn't any room to choose my own path as much as it was choosing sequencing. You're unable to declare or justify wars on your neighbors until 1945, so 9 years after the start date in the game. That's a lot of waiting. There are focuses that give you war goals, like at the end of the Fiume and US branches as far as I followed them. In the case of the former, once you trigger the war, your buddies in avant-garde France absolutely steamroll the Italians and hand you the country. It was anticlimactic. That said, it's not like you're lacking for other nations to try out. My issue is more that the story sets up Fiume to be this rising power, but they are very quickly eclipsed by the much more aggro French, who we will be talking about. Substituting the interesting decisions were long narratives that characterized major events from the perspectives of various citizens of the accelerationist state, which is fine, but I expected a little more function with the flavor. This kind of unceremonious setting up and tearing down even happened again within the Fiume story a little before I was gifted Italy, where it warned me that I was preparing for conflict with the Yugoslavians, so I did, just for them to flip ideologies to my side and we became buddies. Again, anticlimactic. But also funny. Now, I haven't played any of the countries up until the date where all bets are off and you can do whatever you want, but I'm less interested in playing 10 years of Railroad with these smaller focus trees than I am just trying out my own paths with more options in the opening years. I wager that the game is wild once you hit that mark. I'm just still searching for the country I connect with enough to make me want to play that deeply into the game. I've heard the complaint a few different times that some find the portrayal of ideologies in Hoi 4 between democratic, fascist, communist, and the everything else category of non-aligned or monarchical to be much too simplistic. I get why, since political ideas are never this cut and dry in the real world, but I don't really mind this as much for the base game. Besides, wherever the base game lacks depth, there will be a modder around who gets way too into the weeds with it. I've heard that Kaiserreich and Redux, which as of this recording I've only barely looked into, are both known for having way more detailed political decisions and limitations based around your country's ideology. The Fire Rises gives you a bunch of different ways that you have to play the politics game depending on your country selection, which is mostly handled through the decisions menu. Where Red Flood sits on this spectrum, I'm really not too sure. It feels high up there. There are no less than 4 different types of socialism that I can vaguely remember in Red Flood, which I suppose makes sense, what with the name and all. You also get despotic governments, reactionaries, polyarchies. I could go on, but you get the idea. Lots of weird isms showing up. There's one in particular that really personifies Red Flood even more than its socialism, though, and if you've played before, you already know which one I'm about to talk about. Accelerationism is the thing that replaces fascism in Red Flood, an ideology that is a hybrid of radical postmodern movements, revolutionary nationalism, and a perspective that the reality of our future can be owned and cultivated into something beyond the pale of current thought. Empires built out of conquered time, the shattering of the idea of the individual, a religious system devoid of gods and structured on the most paranoid ideations. Any of the videos you watch on Red Flood are going to go on about lunatics and schizos running governments. I can almost guarantee you this is the one that they're talking about. Most accelerationist governments have radical artists and philosophers as their heads of state rather than generals or elected representatives, at least in the beginning. Presenting something that mixes the liberation of anarchism, the avarice of fascism, and the dismantling of the past in socialism serves a unique purpose that I think is worth remarking on, even if my overall conclusion is misplaced. We are used to hearing about things like the effects of authoritarian communism, fascism, etc., on historical nations and people. We see it replicated in themes across fiction and fantasy all the time. More and more we hear about the darker side of democracy and the lengths it has to go to in preserving what it calls freedom. Red Flood wanted something else. Not entirely made up, but it needed to present to the player an equally radical school of thought that we don't hear nearly enough about. What it found fit spectacularly well. I'm doing a little more armchair historian pontificating here, but back in the mid-1800s to the 1940s, I imagine new philosophies like socialism and fascism were equally disturbing and novel ideas. Eventually, some philosophy will develop that will undo whatever came before it. In Red Flood, we see the rise of accelerationism due to the lack of a prevailing national identity for anyone to cling to, hence no fascism. Alright, that about exhausts as much political guesswork as I can do, and I bet I'm lost about like 80% of you at this point. What really stands out to me about the different philosophies presented here are the lengths that each goes to secure itself against being usurped by the others. Red Flood, more than any other Hoi 4 experience I've had, is about the war of ideas, as much as it is about actual militaries. Okay, now the part about actual militaries. Well, some. Playing as the US had a few of the same familiar drawbacks you find in the regular game, namely that I was so worried about how weirdly my own focuses were panning out that I didn't learn much about what the bigger world situation even was. I got that there were socialist revolutions springing up all over the world, but I wasn't able to do much about any of it. I got the idea that I was maybe supposed to be sending volunteers everywhere, similar to playing as China in The Fire Rises, but when it's a country like, say, Japan falling into civil war, as they do early, who do you even support when both could end up being enemies in the future? I like the idea of trying to keep socialism contained and helping to maintain the fragile order among old despotic rulers, but again, I'm too busy wrapping my head around why something like capture Bonnie and Clyde are national focuses, or why you have to do like 4 or 5 of these things that have no effect at all. Like, I get being the lame duck president of an unpopular party means that you don't have much to work with, but you should be able to do something, right? I was able to send some volunteers around to help preserve some of the old social order on my first attempt as a centrist, but the side I was helping lost more often than not, and since you can't recall volunteers, I was losing divisions before I was even ready to go out on the world stage. The beginning focuses don't have any mechanical effects. Instead, they give you an event pop-up detailing the current situation among America. Plagues like the Dust Bowl, organized crime, the Great Depression are all keeping us mired in stagnation, but then you see that a power struggle among the Ku Klux Klan is causing instability across the country, something that at the time may not have been far from the truth. I did like 5 minutes of research on this, and while by 1936 it appears as though the second KKK's membership numbers were well on the decline, Red Flood gives us a world that is always several degrees objectively worse, so no such decline happened here in the headcanon. Rather, they're more entrenched in the political system than ever, as evidenced by what amounts to a short story broken up over several news clippings that play out as you get closer to electing your actual leader for the United States playthrough. I've played as the US twice now, putting several hours into each attempt, and the impression I got both times is that playing as the US here more than anywhere is playing the long, long game. I chose what amounted to both a centrist the first time and an insane technocrat the second, and both times I wasn't doing much in the 5 years between 1936 and 41, other than clicking through focuses and trying to shed myself of the Great Depression. Weirdly, even with this impression from both playthroughs, I don't think that the gameplay is lacking here at all. Whatever narrative you play out, since each of the 4 options for president comes with a largely unique focus tree, it's still a pretty cool story. The centrist guy's path follows a more historically recognizable route, taking on the corruption of both the Klan's presence in politics and the mob's hold on production, preparing the United States for, well, the Red Flood, I suppose. The Technocrat was the playthrough I went back to after the others we'll talk about, but I'm recounting it now because this is a great example of where the mod gives you a haymaker to the teeth just as you were getting your bearings. The centrist playthrough was pretty much exactly what you'd expect for the most part, with some fun focuses thrown in. Yes, I'm really stuck on the Bonnie and Clyde thing, but I'm pretty much done mentioning it now. So how about instead we begin the futurist focus branches by destroying capitalism itself and uprooting the entire banking system. I'm just going to let that hang there for a second. Yeah, this annihilates your country's stability. You'll be sitting at a whopping 0% for about a year. How the country does not immediately default into civil war is just beyond me. Oh yeah, it says right here, milkshakes and roller coasters. God damn us to hell. I was adamant about trying to solve the economy crisis as quickly as possible, so while the rest of the world boiled over, I was busy distracting my starving populations long enough to trick them into making me the emperor of the Technate of America, United States no longer. After that, I annexed Panama and almost everything leading up to the southern Mexico border. Further invasion plans including using the Philippines and Guam as a base to launch a conquest of Asia, but I was more focused on my own continent. I was a little disappointed that my construction was still taking so long with as many bonuses as I had, but that's also about the time that I decided to wage war on Mexico and accidentally drag the entire free world to my doorstep, super pissed at me that I was helping out the bad guys. Thus ended the Tech Native America, a short-lived experiment in isolationism that I don't really care to replicate anytime soon. Alright, moving on. Brazil was my first playthrough where I got to do stuff in Red Flood. I fell right back into my original system for learning Hoi 4, suggested I think by the very talented Hamo Time in one of his new player guides, which is to choose a country that will not be directly involved with or in the path of whatever grand conflict is going to happen. Usually this will mean either playing as a completely support country, like Canada, and that's fine. It's okay. Alright, it's boring. There, I said it. It could also mean that you pick an unsuspecting corner of the world and try your hand at some conquest. The primary motivating force behind Hearts of Iron 4, and all of these map war games, is to make your country's name big as fuck on the map. And so being one of the driving forces, such as playing Germany once you're ready, is pretty much the main skill you need to develop first. I've always found, the 2 times I've done it, that playing in South America is the easiest way of learning how to move things along in the game on your own way. In fact, taking over South America as authoritarian Brazil was so similar to my base game Horror 4 experience that I don't really remember a whole lot when it comes to the details about what the justifications or narrative reasons were behind it. It was also spectacularly easy. Since Brazil has the largest industry, territory, and population in South America, and none of the target countries you're fighting with ever work against you, I spammed as many planes and cavalry divisions that I could, gave them some cannons, and it was basically curtains for the free world below the equator. At first I was thrilled at my success before I realized it was just way too easy to achieve. America never showed up to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, which I guess I was fine with. I'm pretty sure that if I had stuck with that playthrough and went on to challenge the rest of North America, that it would have been really interesting, but I decided to leave off on a high note, with my country huge as fuck on the map. Your conquest of South America ends with a grand finale of decision-making, where you can choose to purge the entire Spanish language from the new empire, shedding the centuries-old scars left by the old conquerors, even though I assume you all still speak Brazilian Portuguese. This results in a genocide of the final holdouts of Spanish speakers across the continent that caps off the play experience of Brazil. I think there should probably be some sort of drawback from this, or it should upset the other nations somewhat, but nope. Casually throwing some ethnic cleansing into the mod without any form of mechanical effects felt a little shoehorned, like a last-minute thing got added to push the envelope without much in the way of substance. With the accelerationist paths going in so many different wild directions, this one ended up relatively tame. If you can't tell by now, Red Flood is secretly the horror on a global scale mod of Hoi 4, and it's about to get even more weird and scary. Man, I don't even know where to fucking begin with France. Avant-garde France is one of the major powers of Red Flood, and while it doesn't start out in the same role as the German Reich from the regular game, honestly, Brazil kind of ended up filling that role. It is definitely one of the main drivers of conflict in the mod, and thus one of the most major nations. The true power of accelerationism is not in the tiny splinter nation of Fiume, but in the minds of the formerly French populace and those abroad with the capacity to change the future. It need only be channeled by the glorious and not all the way there leader Antonin Artaud, which I'm extracting the long historical bit about him that went here. Go look the guy up if you want to know more about this real person. There are several branches you can use to go about this. The path I chose was to establish a religion of paranoiacs, then aggressively assimilate the world into the kingdom of madness for as long as I could. The other options that it presented were either worse or equally evil. You can pivot into becoming an ethno-state based either on radical Islam or Christianity or Aryan race science. Oh, okay, so you can become Nazi Germany, huh? Wild. You can stop the avant-garde movement altogether and rebuild yourself as sort of a peasant druid kingdom thing. That one seemed a little too pacifist for me, and I'd hate for all the ruin we've already brought about to be in vain, so the fever dream continued, only now with a central religion based on our godless, surrealist worldview. Other focus trees detail helping accelerationist uprisings around the world, while you help Spain, Fiume, and yourself to large portions of Europe and Africa, creating an enormous faction called the Ligue Solar that spread almost entirely across 2 continents. It was a bit frustrating that you're unable to invite the other countries into your faction. So far, I haven't seen this option available for any of the nations I've played. Maybe there's a balancing reason, I'm not sure. Or maybe it goes back to the idea of Red Flood's historical World War I context, where joining large factions usually doesn't work out in smaller countries' favor most of the time. This playthrough was also relatively easy, until it wasn't. With France's industry able to be harnessed so quickly, I had more planes and trucks than I had people to drive them. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. I had more population problems than production. This makes absolute sense, by the way. It's probably rather hard to recruit effectively in a country where art is the highest value and with no laws or concept of the self. The narrative that is told through Red Flood, but France in particular, has to be some of Hoi 4 taken to its more depraved limits. Regular Hearts of Iron ignores a lot of the horrific things from our timeline, like the Holocaust or forced famines and other ethnic cleansings that were taking place. Red Flood gives at least some acknowledgement to these things by integrating it into the paths you take. As I followed the surrealist religion branch downward, I noticed that a national spirit called consensual rape had been adopted, explaining itself as the religious belief in unending chaos against the bourgeoisie. I'm not going to try too hard to wrap my head around this. The descriptions of a lot of these focuses sound like unhinged rambling that the uninitiated couldn't comprehend. I'm not bringing this up just to be controversial, but the word shows up more than once in the game, outside of just the avant-garde religion, but always in the context of targeting devastation towards some part of a culture. I'm also not bringing this up as an apologist for, nor condemnation of it. I am fairly certain that the meaning they're going for in using the word rape is in the same context as the Nanjing Massacre or the Nazi operations in the Belarusian SSR during World War II, where over 9,000 villages and settlements were destroyed, and which killed or displaced half of the country's population. However, from this spawned even more religious beliefs, culminating in some erotic Dionysian religion, so, I don't know. Like I said at the beginning, man, I don't even know where to start with France. Red Flood embraces the uncomfortable and fringe, and is certainly not your grandma's Hoi 4. We'll get more into this in a second, but we're wrapping up now. Eventually, my war ended pretty abruptly once all sides got involved. You'll never believe this, but even further radicalizing half of the West made all of the so-called civilized nations pretty pissed, and I was not prepared for it. I'm still pretty terrible at outmaneuvering huge alliances of enemy AI. I was by far the strongest member of my faction, and hadn't lend-leased a single gun to my allies, so we collapsed pretty quickly. In hindsight, zero population and all production was telegraphing pretty hard that I was supposed to be supporting the other nations and letting them draw the aggro, so that's on me. I was too busy writing slam poetry or something to notice. For as strange and mind-expanding, or whatever you want to call it as it was, France was my favorite country that I attempted that had the most interesting paths and options, and definitely gave me the experience that all of the videos online are portraying. But I still don't really know where I stand on the mod altogether. No matter which country I ended up playing as, I never lose the feeling that this game is portraying humanity in its death throes. The amount of strangeness and brutality you encounter is hard to describe any other way than apocalyptic. Of course, we had this level of apocalyptic violence and brutality and strangeness in our own time. The revolutions across Europe, the rise of ideologies that we're still contending with to this day, and the horrors both on the fronts of war and within the nations all contending to come out on top. Most of Hoi 4 seems to shy away from these more uncomfortable conversations, and that's largely fine with me. I still enjoy focusing completely on the strategy and the numbers. It's just remarkable how Red Flood brings the focus back to the zero-sum nature of this type of ideological warfare, and highlights here and there that the fact is that it wasn't just soldiers and supply lines that are being affected, Nor was all of this caused simply by generals and militaries. If it's trying to double down on the idea that these world wars and their after effects are directly caused by the collision of unstoppable ideas meeting immovable traditions, I'd say it does a spectacular job at that. The short stories it presents are well written and insightful. I enjoyed my time overall with Red Flood a lot, and will keep my eye on it for a long time. It kinda goes back to my first impression, the way that stylistically the mod distinguishes itself as being something other. The base game's sanitized language and UI, its cleaner overall portrayal of war, all of that had to have a disturbing, messy twin somewhere out there. And I think I found it. Red Flood isn't taking place as much in the offices of the High Command as it is hunkered down in the barricaded streets, shell-shocked and loving it. Alright, that's all I have for this one. I really hope you enjoyed it. If so, please remember to like and subscribe. I hate asking that out loud, but I get better performance out of videos where I say it twice. I know a lot of you are throwing ideas at me for other mods to try in the comments. I see you, Equestria people, and please continue that. I've got an idea for the next thing I'm working on already, but if you hop in the Discord and give me a shout, I will doubly consider your suggestion. Anyway, I will see you guys at the next one.